Welcome to our latest edition of Saltier Politics. This week is a really interesting, great educational conversation. We are talking about marijuana.
And also Fish, the band, which all of you can stow your cynicism on.
It's a great conversation. I think education is one of the most important things to take away kind of the vilification of a drug, but then also knowledge is power. So when people are going through cancer or their PTSD, that they know about it and can ask their healthcare provider. And if it is a viable option and it helps them live a better life, that's amazing.
Yeah. So we have Peter Barsoom, the founder and president of 1906, which is a cannabis company based in Colorado, to talk to us about the merits of legalization, but also some of the lessons, good and bad, that Colorado can impart on the rest of the country. Colorado, as you know, Emily, was the first to really widely legalize it, and it's very readily available. My understanding is there are more dispensaries in Denver than there are Starbucks stores, which is a little crazy. But there are some good lessons that Peter talks about that you can draw from Colorado for other states that are considering legalization, and also for the federal government, which one day will hopefully catch up to the rest of the world and consider decriminalizing something that was created in nature and, in my mind, is not even 1/10 as bad as alcohol. All right, coming up, Peter Barsoom, founder and president of 1906. Welcome, Peter Barsoom, president and founder of 1906. 1906 is, you started out, Peter, I'll let you tell it, but started out as an edible cannabis company. And tell us the story of how this all came about.
Well, this all came about in late 2014. I decided to quit my job after spending 20 years in finance and was looking for more entrepreneurial opportunities. And I had the opportunity to see firsthand the benefits of medicinal marijuana as I saw my wife struggling with anxiety and depression and the negative side effects in particular of some of the antidepressant medication that she was on. Medical marijuana helped her get off her meds, and it transformed her life. And she was able to get back into work and get back into her acting career. So I, for the first time, had experienced somebody close to me whose life had been transformed by medical marijuana. And that's what inspired us to get into the cannabis business. It was a view that there are a lot of people who could benefit from marijuana versus alcohol and pharmaceuticals, but there was a gap in the market in terms of products that were created for low dose, fast acting, and specific effects. And so we set about to create 1906 to provide a set of products for high functioning adults, like people like us around the table.
It's interesting that you say that, because as somebody who doesn't really consume cannabis but does consume alcohol, it always struck me that alcohol is a legal drug and a legal product. It's not really classified as a drug, although I think it has the same properties, if not worse properties to some extent than cannabis does. I've never really seen anybody get into a fist fight after getting stoned. I've never seen anybody...
Maybe a fist fight with a bread bowl.
Right, exactly, with a Doritos bag. But so I explained to me that 1906, the name is relevant, explain to us why 1906, but it also strikes me that about 100 years ago, if not more, somewhere along the way, the government decided that cannabis, which is a natural product, was something that should not be in the marketplace, although it seems to me that the effects of cannabis are not nearly as bad as the effects of alcohol for most people.
No, absolutely. And 1906 was the year that the Wiley Act was passed, which effectively started the era of prohibition of cannabis. So our mission is to bring cannabis back to its pre-prohibition status. So if we rewind 120 years ago, cannabis was widely available in apothecaries and pharmacies, dispensed by doctors as tinctures. It was in the medical journals at the time as one of the healing medicinal plants that were available to us. So it was kind of during the era of Harry Anslinger and the whole reefer madness and the use of marijuana in order to criminalize immigrant populations, particularly black populations at the time. And that's when we sort of developed this whole incorrect view of marijuana being addictive, causing psychosis, so on and so forth. So it was really the criminalization of marijuana was used as a tool to fight against our own populations here.
What happened in the intervening 30 years where now you have candidates like Cory Booker, like Amy Klobuchar, really serious, obviously sitting senators, but also serious contenders for the presidency, suddenly now saying we should not only legalize marijuana, but expunge the records of those who were affected by the war on drugs. What do you think was the turning point in the last couple of decades where that was able to happen?
I think the turning point we can point to is Sanjay Gupta, who did a documentary on weed on CNN and showed the medicinal benefits of cannabis, in particular helping to treat epilepsy among kids, and showing kids who were nearly catatonic on their meds and still having seizures. And then when given cannabis, all of a sudden they had a life transformation where they didn't need their meds, their seizures stopped. And I think that really woke up the consciousness about what are the benefits of cannabis here. I think the other thing that happened is we realized as a society the cost of criminalization. Not just in financial costs, but the financial costs are significant. If we look at the state of New Jersey, the ACLU estimated that New Jersey spent $1 billion over the last 10 years on enforcing marijuana criminal laws. Those are resources, particularly in a state like New Jersey with high property taxes and limited government resources, that are a waste. Secondly, we realized the negative impact on those societies that have been most hurt by the criminalization of marijuana. Black and Latino communities and families that have been ripped apart, people thrown in jail for either consumption or for the distribution of marijuana, most often than not in kind of small numbers there. And look at what happens with our criminal justice system when people get out. In many cases, their lives are ruined. They can't get jobs. They have been set back from an education perspective, the hardening that happens typically when somebody goes through the criminal justice system. So finally, people are waking up to the benefits of cannabis, but also the social and economic costs of criminalization.
For criminalization on that aspect of it, for more the health side of it, because it's still a drug that... for example, with edibles, they're not regulated. So you may go to one place and get 10 milligrams of a brownie, but then the next place you go, a brownie may be like 50 milligrams. And how that is also not helpful for society. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why we need a regulated market where producers are able to create controlled dose, low dose products for consumers so you know what it is that you're getting. When you open up a bottle of wine, you don't second guess how much alcohol is in the first glass versus the second glass. When you take an Advil, you're not playing Russian roulette with your Advil. However, in the early days of the marijuana market that were unregulated or not well regulated at least, it's a crapshoot what you got. And so that's why we also entered the market, to bring industrial food manufacturing and scientific techniques to ensure that what it is that you get is what the label says, that it's consistent over time and just as predictable as any other substances you put in your body.
What are the lessons from Colorado? You left New York and moved to Colorado when you started this business, because Colorado obviously has a very robust market and legal, unlike New York and other places on the East Coast. What are the lessons from Colorado, both good and bad, that you think apply as the rest of this country looks to potentially legalize cannabis?
Yeah, if you go back in 2014 when Colorado legalized cannabis, this was the first state in the U.S. and the first place really around the world where you can get legal adult use cannabis. This was a massive social, political, economic, and legal experiment. A number of the things that they got right is the fact that all the predictions that the naysayers were talking about largely have not happened, whether it be teen use, for instance, which is a big concern. Teen use has in fact declined by most measures, or at least stayed flat. So the accessibility of cannabis to adults hasn't necessarily meant that teens are using it more. So that's one thing. The second thing is issues around the black market have largely in Colorado, the black market is largely eliminated for Colorado consumers as well. So we were able to bring back cannabis from cartels, from illegal drug dealers, into an open, transparent, regulated system. I think the nimbleness of Colorado and its regulatory structure over the last couple of years has also been a benefit, in the sense that when products first came out, for instance, the dosing and the testing requirements weren't as stringent. Those have gotten better over time. The things that Colorado didn't get right that other states are now doing is looking at what the social justice issues that are associated with the legalization of marijuana. And so one of the things that Colorado hasn't really done is focused on expungement, focused on social equity and how to ensure that participation in the industry is widespread. So those are the things that you're seeing as new states come online, typically New Jersey, for instance, or Massachusetts or California. They're starting to incorporate these types of issues in their program. The last thing that Colorado didn't do is they didn't get good data measurements prior to the rollout of legalization. So a lot of people talk about increased incidence of driving while impaired, for instance. And by and large, it's believable that you're going to get an increase in driving while impaired as there's more use of marijuana and people are figuring out how it is that it affects them. And not having data beforehand is we don't really know what the increases were in either fatalities or in car accidents involving marijuana use. So it's good for states as they roll things out to be sure that they collect accurate data beforehand there.
What's interesting to me is that there is a constant debate among people who are not completely opposed to legalization of some sort between decriminalization and legalization. And to me, decriminalization, you're talking about a black market and you're talking about trying to get rid of people on the black market. To me, decriminalization, all that does is really lead to a black market, right? Because what that now happens is you have the same people illegally selling the product. They're not going to get prosecuted for it, but the state derives no revenue from it, absolutely no, it's kind of still in the shadows. And to me, in some ways, decriminalization, aside from the fact that it obviously prevents young black men at a higher rate from being locked up than they had been before, in some ways, it's almost worse than nothing. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, it's definitely not enough.
Right.
I'm not sure I'd say it's worse than nothing, but it opens up a whole Pandora's box of now you've got a lot more accessibility, but of product that might be laced, might have pesticides, not grown under appropriate conditions. These are psychoactive substances that we put in our body. They affect us physically, physiologically, and so it's important to have controls on it so that we know when it is that we're taking something which can have such a significant effect, that it's safe and healthy. And it's medicine. We don't decriminalize medicine. We legalize medicine and we regulate medicine. And the same approach should be taken with respect to marijuana.
Just kind of going off the black market thing, I know in 2018, Canada legalized marijuana, but their black market is kind of really burgeoning because stores aren't able to reach supplies fast enough and the taxes are really kicking a lot of places' butts. So I guess that's also something. What have you seen? Because I know in Colorado, you said the black market is down, but Canada, the whole country as a whole, the black market's up.
Yeah. Well, you got to look at it this way. Canada just legalized in October. So it's only been a few months. And the rollout of these programs takes some time. So as Canada as the Canadian LPs supply issues become nascent as they expand production, there's not enough stores out there for people to buy. So most people are only really able to buy through the government-run website. So I think we'll see also as they legalize other products. One of the things that Canada did is they only legalized flour and soft gel and oils there. What we know from our own research is that 65% of consumers prefer edibles to smokable. Most people are reducing their smoking, not increasing their smoking. We have a problem with the use of vapes among teens, for instance. So the fact that Canada only gave people kind of smoking option and a very limited soft gel option means that they haven't provided the types of products that consumers who have accessibility to the black market already have. So until the Canadian system sort of comes up and gives people the choices of the products that they have, you're going to still continue to see a thriving black market in Canada.
What was the rationale for that? Did they think that edibles appeal to children more? Did they thought it'd be chocolate? People would want to eat lollipops or chocolate, and they'd be younger. Was that the fear, or what was the fear with Canada?
Yeah, I think that was the fear, and it's a misguided fear. In other words, when we look at the data in the rollout of Colorado, for instance, we did see an increase in calls to the Poison Control Center. We saw an increase in kids going to the emergency room for exposure to cannabis. Two things around that. Number one, part of that data may be spurious in terms of now people might have reported it as cannabis where they they might not have reported it as cannabis for fear of getting in trouble. So, and then the second thing is, in Colorado, at least, everything's in child-resistant boxes. So it is no different than Tylenol or other substances that are in child-resistant containers inside your home. And it's the parent's responsibility just to ensure that kids don't have access to that. We've got to do our part as an industry to make sure that we've got good packaging, that it's not made attractive to kids. But that's kind of where the situation has happened. And if you look at also the data, the number of calls to Poison Control Center for kids getting into cleaning supplies or getting into other things exceeds orders of magnitude that of cannabis. So while there's been an increase in the actual number of situations where kids have been unfortunately exposed to cannabis and have suffered some sort of adverse actions, typically those adverse reactions go away after a few days, so there's no indication that there's any long-term or permanent damage, thank God. And I think it's just this fear around edibles equals things for kids. And while there has been definitely some of that in the way some of the stoner culture products have been in terms of brownies and gummies, there's a whole other world of edibles. The whole other world of edibles that includes beverages and tinctures and chocolates and other products that are specifically designed and specifically marketed to adults. So we shouldn't conflate the two. You can do it right. You can also do it wrong.
Although I have to say, I've been to your factory in Colorado, and aside from the fact that I'm the mother of the only child who doesn't like chocolate, it is really Willy Wonka's factory. It's unbelievable. I mean, you've got these vats of chocolate that you infuse with different kinds of cannabis, and it's amazing. I mean, in addition to the fact that it really just smells incredibly well. It's just, it really is
especially
like,
the days we make our peanut butter cups.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are a bunch of kids that would just dive right into a vat of that, just not even knowing what's in there. It's so just delicious smelling. To me, what's interesting about this is that it seems that the public will to legalize is they are much more than unfortunately politicians have across the board. You do have members of Congress now and the Senate obviously saying that they support legalization, but even so-called liberal states are taking their time. I have a house up in Massachusetts, and I did a little research when I was up there. I'm in Western Massachusetts, which is like the People's Republic. It's as liberal as it gets, and even there, you need a medical marijuana card to even walk. They won't even open the door for you without a medical marijuana card. And Massachusetts has legalized, but it seems like it's not popping up for recreational as quickly as Colorado did. I'm not sure what the disconnect is or what you think about that.
Yeah, Massachusetts has been a slow rollout. They've taken their time, which I think is rightfully so, while the voters voted in at the same time that they voted Trump in. And if you also just go back for a second on Election Day, the two winners on Election Day were Trump and cannabis.
Right. Not in the same states, but yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it makes sense for places like Massachusetts to take their time and understand what the consequences are and ensure that there's local community support. You had in Colorado a situation where there was widespread medical marijuana stores and a thriving medical marijuana market. So it was a lot easier to basically take the medical marijuana market and use that to grow into the recreational, pretty much in an overnight fashion. Massachusetts had a very small medical marijuana program, and they've been very strict about how to let adult stores and other things open up there. So I think it's just a matter of time. And 5 years from now, we'll look back and be like, okay, the fact that it took Massachusetts 2 years to roll it out is okay because they're doing it in a thoughtful way.
Well,
it's coming.
Yeah, well,
I'll wait for it.
Well, what's interesting is cannabis-related job openings grew 76% in 2018. And then it said that the Bureau of Labor Statistics said that there are going to be more cannabis jobs than manufacturing by 2020. So I feel like that's certainly something lawmakers, and especially Republicans, I feel, can't ignore.
Yeah. And I think it's even beyond that, because the consequences of a new industry have reverberation effects beyond that. So it's not just the producers and those directly involved in the cannabis industry. As you start to look concentric circles outside of that, you're going to have an industry that is focused on construction and building, because it's going to take more greenhouses, it's going to take more manufacturing centers. So there's a positive effect on the construction business. And as you go out further and further, there's a positive effect on marketing and packaging services, on legal services, so on and so forth. So we have an opportunity to create a massive new market, or transform a massive new market from illegal to legal, that we haven't had since effectively prohibition. And given how important jobs are to the Republican agenda, this is something that Republicans and Democrats alike should be totally in favor of. And if you look, for instance, back when Florida voted on medical marijuana, 71% of the voters in Florida voted on medical marijuana. My guess is if you asked the voters of Florida, is the earth flat or is it round, you probably wouldn't even get 71% on that. So
Emily's from Florida, so she can attest to
It's absolutely true.
the nature of the state.
I would say 71% would say it is flat.
Let's talk about the whole gateway drug concept, because that's one that I think a lot of opponents of cannabis legalization constantly bring up. And so if you're going to have a joint, you obviously are going to be shooting up heroin within 6 weeks. Talk about the science behind that argument.
The short answer is there is none.
Right.
The notion that a particular substance is a gateway to other substances has no validity in fact or in research whatsoever. It's not the drug that's a gateway drug. It's often the drug dealers that are gateways to other drugs. So the criminalization, the putting it in the dark shadows, the fact that you've got folks who are, profiting from other types of substances, and they might be the ones who are pushing people to go from one substance to another substance, is the more likely fact there than it is anything that's particular to the substance itself. If you take a go bean before you work out, doesn't mean you're going to come back home and want to snort coke. There's just no evidence to that whatsoever, and that was a great way of demonizing the plant, during the reefer madness years.
So when they talk about gateway drugs and regulation, it would be much better for a 17-year-old, I guess, an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old, whatever the age of legalization is, to be able to go to a store and buy something that they understand is a true product, rather than knowing what something is laced with on the black market, as you said. Right.
In the piggyback off you mentioned your go beans, just so the listeners know what they are. They're these really tasty THC CBD infused edibles from your company, but it says specifically on the box how much THC and how much CBD it has, which to your point, Julie, is really important.
Yeah. Otherwise, you can end up in a bad experience. And nothing is worse than a overdose or taking too much cannabis. You feel like the world is falling. You can't wait to find the stop button, and you just want to get off that train. And so it's really, really important that everybody in using cannabis starts with a low dose and see how it affects their body before taking too much on. We've learned as adults now how to titrate alcohol. I know that 2 martinis affects me in a particular way versus 2 glasses of wine. And so we've learned through socialization, through our parents, through our communities, what is the right level and the right time for alcohol. And it's going to take some time for people to do the same thing with this new substance called cannabis.
Speaking of cannabis, when I was at Fox for about 14 years, the running joke was that I was a huge Fish fan, and literally viewers would tweet me and email me about what a complete loser I am. I took you to your first Fish show, or actually you took me to your first Fish show in Colorado. I think it was last August. Was it the best experience of your life, or just one of the best experiences of your life?
It was definitely one of the best experiences of my life.
You were so out of there after like the first hour. I turned around, you were gone.
It was the community gathering of Fish fans is amazing. Like, this is a community that I had never been exposed to, and the bond that brings thousands of people together for 3 days in Denver, or in some cases all around the country, people who are traveling there, is an amazing community that they've created.
And for those Fish fans who are listening, and the rest of you, I don't want to hear from you because I've heard from you for 14 years on this, but you are friends with one of the guys from Fish, right? Or he's an investor, he's a friend?
He's a friend of ours,
right.
Yeah, Tom Marshall, who is the songwriter for Fish, and we had created a special edition amphibian bliss cups for the Fish show, which was a big success among Fish fans.
I might add, I was totally geeking out when you introduced me to him. I could not be more excited. And it turns out his daughter went to the same high school I went to, and he could not be less impressed with me. It was like the biggest letdown. I was so ecstatic to meet somebody from Fish. He's like, yeah, I get to see you. All right, next. Which was completely heartbreaking for me, who has spent probably all my disposable income in college following Fish around the greater New England area and blowing off my exams and otherwise living a life my parents would not want to know about. Anyway, I just had to talk about that because it was something that I hadn't gone to a Fish show, I think, since college.
You lit up when you were talking about it. I remember before you went, you're like, guess where I'm
I
going?
know, and nobody else was impressed, but I was super excited. And I dragged a friend of mine who works at the New York Times. He was going to be there anyway, but the two of us are the only two people I think I know in my adult life who were ecstatic to be there. Nobody else seemed to appreciate the love that I bear for Fish, the band.
Well, everybody else there was.
Yes.
So you just need to find your community, Julie.
I know. I might need to move out to Colorado or Vermont or wherever they all hang out. I know. Nobody on the Upper West Side of New York, apparently. Well, actually, Trey Anastasio, the lead singer of Fish, lives on the Upper West Side, and I see him on the street once in a while. And when I do, it takes every fiber of my being not to do what I did to your friend and completely throw myself all over him and tell him how transformative he was to my college years. And
you just need to find that secret club of Fish fans on the Upper West Side. All the viewers here, email Julie, let her know where the Fish people hang out.
Please do, because I've heard so much negative stuff about it, and hashtag you all suck, because I love Fish. Let's go back to your life and sort of how you said that you were working on Wall Street or in finance, and your wife, you'd met your wife, and she kind of opened your eyes to this. But that must take an inordinate amount of discipline, if not bravery, to give up everything you've known your whole life and invest everything you have in a completely new industry that has a lot of upside potentially, but also a lot of risk attached to it.
Yeah, I think we were sufficiently crazy. Left New York after 20 years, moved out to Colorado, invested all the money I'd made in finance into starting up a cannabis business. And I remember at the time, I was fortunate enough to have a lot of people think, wow, that is a great idea. And to be very supportive. And we had early on investors that believed in our vision and what it is that we were trying to do. But it was tough going, whether it be raising money was difficult, getting into and understanding the dynamics of the Colorado market were difficult. Early on, recruiting people, recruiting top quality talent was also difficult. What's amazing is since we launched the company in 2015 and 4 years later, how much the world has transformed. That now it's the talk of the town across the country, that more and more states are legalizing it. You have how many governors today, from Mario Cuomo to Pritzker in Illinois, to Connecticut, to Maryland, all across the country, political leaders, to presidential candidates who are talking about legalization of cannabis. So the world has changed in ways that I couldn't have even imagined 4 years ago. You've got multi-billion-dollar companies on the Canadian and the U.S. Stock market. And remember, America is about making money. And so those are the kinds of stories about, the making of money that actually has a role in destigmatizing cannabis.
The one fascinating thing about this is, though, because it's still banned federally, banks really can't loan to you. I mean, you have to go through alternate sources of lending in order to get financing, right?
Because we have a basic business checking account. We pay close to $2,000 a month to our bank for a basic business checking account. Why? Because they can. Because there are increased compliance costs, but because they can. It's very difficult to get access to banking services, just kind of basic transactional services. But lending from banks is pretty much non-existent. So even on things like a commercial mortgage, which should be in the single digits, people are paying 12-15% on a highly secured asset there.
So if you want to open up a facility anywhere, let's say Massachusetts, New Jersey, anywhere you want to expand, you can't just go to whoever, Bank of America, and take out a commercial mortgage. You have to actually go to alternate business lenders to even do that for real estate because of the nature of what you do.
It's even worse than that, Julie. I was about to buy an apartment here in New York because we're coming back, opening up Massachusetts and New Jersey and other states. Went through the mortgage process with one of the large national lenders. And at the final stage, even though I had disclosed it from day one, kind of where my primary source of income was, at the final stage before we were done, they said, actually, because you derive your income from marijuana, we can't lend you. So it's not only that I can't borrow against the business, I can't even borrow personally to buy my own apartment that is in my name and get a mortgage because my primary source of income comes from the cannabis business.
That's absurd.
No, it's just counterintuitive too, because it forces people to go through kind of backdoor means to get what they need to get to move forward, which is the opposite again of what the government wants.
Yeah, and the opposite, if we want a legal regulated system, one of the most important elements of that is the tracking of financial flows. If everything is happening in cash, if you can't get services there, you're exposing the industry to criminal activity, whether it be, people who want to go in and rob dispensaries because of the belief that they have a lot of cash in them, or you encourage folks to potentially, hide financial flows there. So all of this, the situation as it relates to kind of banking is antiquated and at cross purposes with creating a legal regulated market. And the power is in the hands of Congress. Congress can and should act. We have now more than 60% of Americans live in states that have legalized some form of cannabis or another, whether it be medical or adult use. And so if more than half the country lives in states where there is a legal regulated market, what does it take for Congress to finally act?
Well, you think this is Congress's plan to basically starve you and others of access to capital and therefore stymie the industry, kind of strangle it in its crib before it gets going, or you think it's just an unintended consequence?
I think Congress has no plans, and so I don't think it's a specific act, but I think other than a specific act of cowardice.
Right. Tell us one thing about you that people might be surprised to learn. We always ask everybody this.
Let's see. Well, I met my wife in Brazil on a yoga retreat. We're living a mile apart from each other in Manhattan, going to the same yoga studio, but at different times, and never really run into each other. And it took a trip to Brazil, thousands of miles away, for a week on a deserted. Not deserted, but on natural park reserve for me to meet the love of my life.
That's awesome. Awesome. I think this discussion is going to keep going and going because it seems to me that more and more states are finally taking a look at this. I know New Jersey's up next. I know New York, Governor Cuomo has talked about hypothetically doing something here as well. It always strikes me as a New Yorker that the state is so late to the game on this issue, especially as the hub of commerce, as a good liberal state. Why Governor Cuomo has been dragging his feet on this issue. I think he's finally seen the light.
Why do you think he finally saw the light?
I think political realities have forced him to see the light. I think finally the Democrats finally control the legislature in a meaningful way for the first time since he's been governor. I think he has seen the writing on the wall with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others getting elected, that I think he understands that this is finally an issue that people in the Democratic base are paying, and not just the Democratic base, I shouldn't say it's just Democratic, that people are paying attention to because of the fact that it is about social justice, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind the revenue either. I mean, we talk about the fact that this is a social justice issue all the time. Politicians don't want to say they're going to balance their budget on what's a quote-unquote sin tax, but the reality is you can raise millions of dollars potentially.
And
And states have balanced budget amendments. They all have to balance their budgets. It's a great source of revenue, I think, and something that privately politicians talk about, but publicly they don't want to sort of say that they're doing it. But that's really a big incentive, I think, for politicians as well, for governors to balance the budget.
And I think we're starting to also wake up to and realize what some of the other, in addition to the economic benefits direct in terms of tax revenue, what the other benefits are in terms of healthy outcomes, patient outcomes. So opioid use decreases. We have some data that shows that Medicare costs actually go down in states with medical marijuana. We have some recent data from a study that was done by Sue Sisley, who's one of the leading researchers on cannabis, and she did a study among vets with respect to PTSD, and that the use of medical marijuana among vets who have PTSD resulted in decreased opioid use. And interestingly, the second drug that we saw decreased usage of among veterans with PTSD was Viagra.
Oh.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. We talked briefly about the fact that this may be a gateway drug in some people's mind. It's actually, based on studies, potentially quite the opposite, where people who are taking opioids because of whatever issues they've had, whether it's a stress factor or it's a PTSD issue, actually can use this product as opposed to having to take something much worse, whether it's Vicodin or other opioids, and certainly heroin, which becomes just a complete slippery slope to complete disaster.
I mean, if anything is a gateway drug, what we have seen is prescription opioids are the gateway drug.
No question. When people talk about the legalization of cannabis, they talk about the financial benefits, they talk about the criminal justice element, but I feel like what you just said is not something that people talk about enough. And yet you go to states, New Hampshire being a great example because it's always the first in the nation, so people constantly politically talk about the opioid epidemic in New Hampshire. That's not by accident. It's not like these young men and young women are suddenly waking up and shooting up heroin. It's because they had a car accident, or they broke their foot, or some injury took place, or some sort of psychological injury took place where they feel the need to get a prescription drug. And as you said, they become addicted to it. And that's what leads to the slippery slope of these people dying at an incredible rate. And I'm wondering if people...
Maybe we should criminalize opioids. Maybe we should make them illegal. I mean,
exactly right.
How many people have died from cannabis?
I think 0, right?
0.
Yeah.
How many people have died from this drug, from the opioids? Tens of thousands of people. If even 5 people died from a cannabis overdose, we'd be seeing it on the front page of the New York Times. People would be talking about needing to criminalize it, getting rid of this substance. We need to take a much broader look at what are the substances that are available to people, which things we call legal, which things we call medicine, which things we call illegal. And then you begin to see that there's no rhyme or reason to this. They're artifacts of our limited scientific understanding. They're artifacts of the political power that pharmaceuticals have, and they're artifacts of the fact that they're able to convince doctors that somehow opioids are good to give out. And so there's a massive education that needs to happen with respect to health practitioners as to the benefits of cannabis, but also some of the really harmful effects of some things that we call approved by the FDA.
Well, and you just nailed it, because the pharmaceutical lobby is incredibly potent, very powerful, and there's no, you're starting to see an emergence of a small cannabis lobby, but it can't compete with what the power of the pharmaceuticals has been able to establish.
Totally.
No, but we're seeing how important conversations like this are, because again, it's taking away the vilification of the drug, because that is what has been so omnipresent for so long. But now the more people talking about it, one of my friends, she had 2 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, and has really bad PTSD. And I know some veterans clinics that she went to, when she asked about cannabis, they completely were like, no, or were just against it. And it's, the more people talk about it, and she finally did find one that she can get it.
And they probably prescribed a ton of opioids to her
Right.
to calm her down, which made her
way worse.
Right.
And so, but when she did finally find one with it, it completely changed how she is as a human. So I just think conversations like this are important. And then when people start acting on them, but the more people have the knowledge, the more they can do something.
Yeah, Emily, you're absolutely right. It is criminal what we're doing as a society to our vets who served this country, fought hard, and came back with really severe problems. And we're not addressing their issues. We're not addressing their quality of life. And we're denying them access to medicine. If it was my family member or my friend who was suffering from something, who wouldn't go? I would go to the ends of the earth to find some way to relieve that loved one's suffering. Right. We all talk about how we love our veterans, but what are we doing actually to get out there and relieve their suffering and give them access to products that could be potentially, I'm not saying it's for everybody, but definitely for a significant enough group of people, they've found relief that they've never been able to find in their life through medical cannabis. And we still have severe restrictions on it in terms of the VA research, in terms of the VA dispensing it. And then also, as you probably know, and I'm sure you have a lot of listeners who are gun owners as well, the fact that if you have a medical marijuana card, technically you can't purchase a gun as well. And so why is it that we have to make a choice between a Second Amendment right that we have to own a gun and also quality of life in terms of being able to use medical cannabis?
That's interesting. So if you have not a mental or psychological issue, but you have, I'm going to say epilepsy, right? And you have a medical marijuana card, you can't purchase a gun.
Correct.
That's insane considering how we allow everybody on the planet to purchase guns when they have all sorts of mental issues.
And it goes to the point at the very beginning of when we were talking about cannabis is you don't see a husband come home and beat up his wife smoking a ton of weed, but you do see the alcoholic come home and do that. So why give that person a gun?
Right. Where this kind of opened my eyes, and I know we have to wrap up, but where this opened my eyes a couple of years ago is I have a very good friend whose son was terminally ill with cancer. The only thing that would relieve his son's pain was cannabis. I mean, it was just literally the only thing that could help him towards the end of his life. And my friend had to go and essentially find drug dealers to buy his teenage son, cannabis on the street. God knows what it was laced with, because he needed to help his son relieve his pain. And you said, how do we treat our veterans? How do we treat the terminally ill in places that medical marijuana is not yet legal, where we don't provide that kind of relief to them and instead provide them with opioids that make them go loopy and not really have a quality of life towards the end of their life that they should have. And that really, I never gave it much thought before that. And that was about 5 or 6 years ago. And after that happened, I just, as somebody who really doesn't consume cannabis, but became a huge proponent of legalization, because I just thought this is completely insane that we're treating a product that is created in nature that, to me, from everything I've seen, has not even close to the effects of alcohol, never mind opioids or anything else, that we're treating it in a way that is criminal, is still Schedule I, which is absurd to me. So that's my 2 cents on this whole issue. Yeah. Peter Barsoom, president and founder of 1906. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Julie. Bye. Thank you, Emily.
You rock.
Thanks. This was quite a week, Emily. I've got to tell you, I think this is the week that everybody focused on all the wrong things, as always, thanks to the lovely social media platform of Twitter and cable news. What's making me salty is that this whole Juicy Smollett, I don't even, Juicy told me how to Jesse. I don't watch Empire, so I don't know, but whatever happened. I'm sorry that he felt the need to make up that he was attacked. I'm also sorry that he decided to blame people who are in the MAGA movement on it. Having said that, we just had a guy who had a list of journalists and progressive politicians that he was drawing up, and apparently a guy in the Coast Guard who was days away from going on a killing spree and killing and having a massive terrorist attack where he was going to go kill all these people. There were weapons found in his home. He is a Coast Guardsman, so he obviously knows his way around weapons. He was looking for where progressive politicians lived. He Googled that on his computer, on his work computer, because he obviously is not that smart. This is scary to me, and this is rhetoric that emanates, I hate to say this, but when the president calls journalists the enemy of the people, some crazy people take that to heart, and I think you have a responsibility as the leader of the free world to choose your words carefully, because you do have an influence over people in outsized ways. And while we're all sitting there focusing on some dumb actor and doing some dumb stuff, I really wish we would take a moment to think about the fact that words have consequences, and calling journalists enemy of the people is just completely the wrong lesson to draw and impart from what can happen. And we saw what could happen. Similarly, the NRA put out a magazine this month that had Gabby Giffords, who, as you recall, was shot by a gunman in Arizona a few years ago. A picture of her with Nancy Pelosi with the tagline "Target Practice" next to it. Now, the NRA is going to say, oh, that was just a coincidence. But again, words have consequences, and crazy people take those words to heart. So when you have a face of a woman who was already shot and the Speaker of the House, the most powerful female politician in the country, next to the word target practice, that makes me incredibly salty. It makes me more than salty. It actually makes me incredibly frustrated and angry and scared for where we're going as a society. So please, NRA, Donald Trump, words have consequences. Just think about what you're doing before you do it, unless you really want people to take you seriously, and in ways that I hope that you don't.
Right. Just quickly off of that, someone on Twitter who I follow, Charlotte Clymer, she's a transgender activist and former military. And she was talking about the treatment of soldiers once they're out of the military, but being in it as an infantry person, for example, you're trained to kill every day. Every single day, it's ingrained in you. And that is who you are, what you're learned to do, and it's reactive. So then when you get out of the military and don't have that kind of go, 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 I feel like a lot of people look towards groups like white supremacist groups or groups where they find this brotherhood and they find this enemy, because that's what they were trained to do, find an enemy. So it's when people get out of the military, it's again kind of even what we talked about in our conversation today. It's treatment of people who have gone through these traumatic situations and learn differently.
Exactly. So what's making you salty?
What is making me salty this week is the Roman Catholic Church and what we're learning from all the sex abuse and the cover-up in Europe, in America, and how just there's no accountability within the church, and there's really no system to take down these priests who have really ruined the lives of so many young children.
Although the Pope did come out with a very, very strongly worded statement this week about them and about pedophile priests in ways that I think previous popes never had. And he laicized, Cardinal McCarrick, who was the cardinal of Washington, D.C. and the Newark Archdiocese in New Jersey, and had been a very prominent figure in the Catholic Church in the United States, but then was found to have abused seminarians and apparently children. The Pope did take action against him. I think the highest ranking man of the church who's no longer a member of the church or no longer a cardinal because of what this Pope did. So do you feel, you're Catholic, I'm not, do you feel like the church is moving slowly but surely towards more accountability, or do you think this is just window dressing?
I think it's window dressing because, okay, a statement is one thing, but actual change, I think now with social media and as globalization happens, more people are finding out and connecting dots, where it was a lot easier to not have patterns and not publicize things when you don't get information so quickly.
Yeah, look, I will say again, we just had a conversation about cannabis and one has nothing to do with the other, but I will say that even in recent years, what the church has done has come a long, long, long way from what it had done under John Paul II, where they really just pretended this issue didn't exist. So
Right.
I do have to say, the Catholic Church does not move fast. It
No,
is not
no.
an institution that is designed to move fast. They think in terms of millennia, not in terms of days or years. But I do feel in the last 20 years there has been slowly but surely, partially because of social media, partially because newspapers and others have really started to pay attention to this issue, but an accounting and a reckoning of what's going on. But I can see how members of the church who are good Catholics are still frustrated about the fact that they are not moving as fast as some would wish. I agree with that.
Agreed. And then I would just like to say one more thing. Our listeners may have heard new intro and outro and transition music. I'd like to give a thanks to Evan Donahue, a great musician, and you can find him on Spotify, but he made us a very unique tune. So
Evan, you rock. Thank you. The music is fantastic. And everybody, we'll see you soon. Take care.